What's going on? You may know this lens. It's only the top selling lens of 2019, the Tamron 28-75mm F2.8. 2.8 zooms are highly sought out and for good reason. 2.8 is considered by many to have the it factor, enough light acquisition and enough blurring abilities. This particular lens is highly attractive due to the low price, good optics, and small size. It's not very big for a full frame zoom of its kind. The Sigma and Sony alternatives are around 300 grams more or 55% heavier. If I came home from work and found out my wife was 50% larger and heavier, it would be my duty to provide the much needed support. The good-hearted me won't let her down. I'll do my best to help her pack her belongings. As for the body being plastic, it's better than soft metal in my opinion. A lot more durable. This is not run-of-the-mill plastics you see from the Dollar Tree. More like plastics from Neiman Marcus. It's quality stuff. The lens takes 67mm front filter threads, an extremely common filter size for medium-sized lenses, such as the Sony 24-GM, 85mm, and almost every single Tamron FE lens. The body is fully weather sealed and offers no frills. There are no buttons or switches of any kind on the body. The lens has a minimum focus distance of 19 centimeters or 7.5 inch at 28mm for wide angle macro with a magnification of 1 to 2.9, and at 75mm it can go to 1 to 4 magnification, which is very respectable. Let's talk about the field of view. 28mm is wide enough for most images of people, and for general landscapes it can be limiting. 24 is very close to ultra-wide territory, hence why so many are stuck between deciding if starting at 28mm versus 24mm is worth it or not. My take is that if I can comfortably use a 35mm all day, I can probably make do with a zoom that starts off a good bit wider. Weight and size happen to be really important to me. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to like this exact video that you are watching and subscribe to my channel. Satisfy that gas without judgment. Now, back to the program. Let's go over focus breathing. As you can see here, this lens seems to be breathing at both ends of the spectrum. If you're a video user, well, here it is. Now let's take a look at the sharpness. It shows that the lens is stronger on the wide end than it is on the telephoto end. Alright, we'll start off at 28mm. Center sharpness, they all look great, even at wide open f2.8. If you go in through the aperture f4, 5.6, f8 is seemingly no improvement in the center. Here's a look at mid-frame, and it still looks pretty darn good at f2.8. There is a slight improvement by 5.6, but ever so slight. Mid-frame f2.8 remarkably well. Here we are. This is essentially edge sharpness, how far the side sharpness would be, and you can see that f2.8 is starting to get a tiny bit soft compared to f4. It's just a hair sharper, but 5.6 you can really notice it, and f8 and 5.6 not too different, more similar than not. As for the far corners, f2.8 is a bit soft, 4 is much improved, and 5.6 improves even more. f8 is probably the max it gets. So 28mm, it generally does pretty well, even wide open. I think this is an okay performance for wide open 28mm at f2.8. At 28 is pretty good. Next up is 35mm, 100% f2.8 to f8. There is only a very slight improvement, if any, by stopping down. Center of the Tamron is pretty strong. Mid-frame, it continues to be strong. It does get a hair sharper once you stop down. It's hard to see unless you have them side by side. So F4 through F8, it's pin sharp essentially. Okay, now for the edges, it does get quite a bit softer. Wide open, it improves by F4 just a little bit, but by F5.6, it does improve quite a bit. Dropping down to F8, it does get a hair sharper as well. And at F8, it's borderline pin sharp. Lastly, far corners. Even at F2.8, I find it's probably usable in most scenarios. Similar story here. At F4, it improves 5.6 a tiny bit more. F8 a tiny bit more. I wouldn't say it's pin sharp at F8, but it's very, very good. Here is 50mm. It's good at 50mm, F2.8, F4, 5.6. They're all pretty good. So if you're going to stop down, it's not going to make that much of a difference. If you're going to stop down, I would go from F2.8 to 5.6 to the max sharpness. Otherwise, from F2.8 to F4, the difference is not that large. So you'll have to stop down 2 stops if you want to maximize it, because F2.8 is pretty darn usable. It's pretty good. Same story, the mid frame is very, very good. Wide open. Dropping down to F5.6, you'll see the most improvement. So it's very strong, wide open. So this is around the edge, and 50mm on this lens, it seems to perform very well. At least my copy. You don't get too much improvement stopping down. Even wide open, it's pretty darn good. If you're doing for landscapes, big prints, go to F5.6 or F8. For the far corners, it does degrade a little bit. The fine detail you see in these background items, they are not here. They start to show up more on F4 and 5.6. They get pretty clear. So if you're in a pinch, I would use F2.8 if you're in a pinch, because you could probably just sharpen this in post, because it's just so close already. It's pretty good at 50mm. All right, time for 75mm. Wide open center is very good. There's good amount of detail here. Stopping down doesn't seem to do much other than increase depth of field. Let's take a look at mid frame. Mid frame, there is a good bit of degradation. It's still very usable. There's an increase in sharpness and contrast as you top down. F4 is good. F5.6 is really good, as well as F8. Time for edge sharpness. Now this story is even more pronounced. It definitely has a slight glow effect. Stopping down, it's reduced halfway. Stopping down to F4, stopping down to 5.6, it gets pretty darn sharp. Same story at F8. Far corners wide open, there is good amount of softening, and the corners are darker. There's vignetting going on. There's a mild improvement once stop down to F4, a much more substantial improvement once stop down to 5.6, but for this you really do have to stop it down to F8 to get a lot of the detail in. If you're looking at these finer branches or whatever these things are, they're kind of muddy right here, and F8, yeah, there is definitely more separation to them. Even F5.6 to F8, there is a clear improvement. So overall, this lens does sharpen up very well if you're using it for landscapes. If you're using it for people photos, I see most of the frame is pretty darn good. Just keep people away from the far corners. Next up, we'll see if the lens is parfocal. It's focused in the background, and I think it is. It's certainly very close. When it comes to autofocus, it's as close as first party as it gets. Whether you're backlit, side lit, backlit indoors, or extremely low light. It seems to work well either way. In practice, it's quick, smooth, and it works in all types of lighting. There's been multiple firmware updates, and I feel that the lens is vetted. There's not much more you can ask from a lens. The lens has some flaring. Going through the focal range, you can see it here. It's wide open at first and stop down. The flare control is decent, could be better. I think that the style of flaring is fairly artistic and nice. Your mileage may vary. Next up are the sun stars. This is around f16 to 22. I am changing it within the footage. I think it's decent, could be better, and there are some lenses that are far inferior. The Loca and CA is well controlled. Here it is at all the major focal lengths. The greens and purples are well controlled. Generally not an issue with this lens. Time for Bokeh, and you may already have a feeling of how it behaves based on the samples provided previously in the video. Here it is at different working distances. It's mostly great, and at the same time it's an f2.8 lens. I'd say keep your expectations fair. Final thoughts on the Tamron 28-75 F2.8. It offers an excellent warranty, 6 years here in the United States. Good optics with occasional busy bokeh on the long end. Well-vetted performance and long-term durability, like an abused spouse. It offers a ton of value for the price. A solid do-it-all lens worth the consideration.